Hi, everyone. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. I'm Matt Freese, and I have an exciting solo episode for you here today. Obviously, the Vikings are coming off of a fantastic win against the Green Bay Packers. Really awesome, has set them up to have a battle for the 1 seed with the Detroit Lions on Sunday Night Football. I don't think it could have played out any better for the NFL. Obviously, if you're the Vikings, you would like for them to, I suppose, already have the 1 seed wrapped up, even if that was very far from all of our minds collectively going into the season. But it's just an awesome game and an awesome opportunity for what's been a really, really awesome team throughout the entire season. I mean, I certainly never had high hopes for Sam Darnold as a Vikings quarterback. I'm sure there weren't a ton of people who, even thought that they were like a bona fide playoff team, right? Like I certainly could have seen this team as a fringe playoff team, assuming what I would have thought would be the best case outcome for Sam Darnold. I don't think I would have seen this team as a team with the, tied for the second best record in the NFL, guaranteed to have like a top 3 record in the NFL and fighting for a first round bye at the final week of the season. Like, I don't think that was on anybody's bingo card coming into this NFL season. So it's just been an awesome journey and awesome to be able to watch it and talk about this team all year. So really, really thankful for that. And honestly, no matter how the Lions game ends, I think it's a successful season regardless. I mean, you get to have 14 wins and be the 5 seed, which is a little bit frustrating, but also understandable with the way the division structure and that sort of thing works. But back to the Packers game, a little bit. I think this is the most meaningful win of the Viking season so far. I mean, you hope, right, that the Vikings have exactly 4 more meaningful wins, right? Whether or not they win the Lions game, I guess the path to the Super Bowl now is win 4, right? Because you either get the bye or you don't. And at the end of the day, like it's just. It was kind of a complete team performance to me. And I realized that the Packers came back, right, and made a game of it, and the Vikings needed to have a really impressive catch by Cam Akers on the 4-minute drill to end this game. But at the end of the day, I think the Packers are a pretty good football team. And the Vikings have played a number of pretty good football teams over the course of the season. Right, you have the Texans, who were a playoff team early in the season. Obviously, they've disappointed relative to expectations. You had a really close game against the Lions early in the season that they ended up losing, and I'm gonna get to that when I cover, the preview of the Lions game. But you had the San Francisco team before everybody got hurt, right? That everybody expected to be one of the best teams in the NFL. You had, and maybe some of the wins aren't necessarily as impressive as we thought at the time, right? The Jets win doesn't look as good. I would say the Seahawks, even compared to what we think going into that game, they've kind of fallen apart down the stretch. The Cardinals have kind of fallen apart down the stretch, right? But at the end of the day, like, you can only beat the teams you put in front of you. The NFL puts in front of you, right? And the Vikings have done that 14 times. If you can dissect any other team's schedule, right, and look at their wins and see that really, many of them aren't really as impressive or signature wins as what the Vikings even have. So, the 2 signature wins against Packers, really, really impressive. Really exciting to sweep them. Obviously, we've had a history of kind of falling short against the Packers, around the holiday season. So it was awesome to be able to see that win. And if I dive into it here, I want to start with the offensive side of the ball, kind of what I saw through studying the tape in the course of the game. And it was a little bit of a weird experience for me because I had a family thing Sunday night, and initially it was going to be fine because the game was at 1:00, and then I'm in Eastern time, not Central time, right? So they moved the game to 4:30, and it's like a disaster for me because I get to watch like basically the first half. So I saw the Vikings kick the field goal to go up 10-3, and then I had to leave and just kind of watch the rest of the game on tape, right? But in that early going, I was really impressed with what the defensive performance put out, and I put it on an article on Zone Coverage about kind of how man coverage was the key to the defense stopping the Packers in the first half and then allowing their offense to kind of build up the lead. But I'll start with the offensive side of the ball here and just kind of my notes from the game in terms of the first thing. And, it's been a note, I think, almost every single week this season, is just how impressed I am with Kevin O'Connell's play design. I think that he just regularly does a phenomenal job with it. And, this game was no different. I think some things to point out, right? So one of the early third downs in the game, and I pointed this out on BlueSky Live, the Vikings ran, and I think it was on their first touchdown drive, right? So they've had a couple of failures, right? They have the field goal that's short. They have the first third down conversion, but then they ended up punting on the very first drive. So they're trying to get something going, and they end up in a third down situation, 3rd and 3 or something, right? So it's not really a situation where you can run the ball, at least if you're the Vikings. But this is where Kevin O'Connell really cooks, I would say, in the passing game, and it has to do with how he gets to his bunch formations and the route combinations that he runs out of those bunch formations. So the key for this one was a motion by Justin Jefferson. So the Vikings start out with Addison and Jefferson stacked on the left side and just one receiver to the right side. And I think it was Naylor kind of on as a nub receiver. They motion Jefferson all the way across the formation to stack with Naylor. Then after that's set, right, because you need to be set for 1 second to be able to send a second guy in motion, or you're going to get an illegal formation penalty or an illegal shift penalty rather. They send Addison across and snap the ball as he's running, kind of creating a bunch formation, right? I've talked about a bunch about Kevin O'Connell's motions into and out of bunches, but the traditional response for a defense against a bunch is to box it, or have one guy take the furthest outside route, one guy or really two guys take deep routes, and one guy take the inside route. Right. And kind of the short guy who takes either the second outside or the second inside, or he can carry a guy deep, a second guy deep. So it really kind of depends on the way the offense runs it. But essentially what the Vikings do in this is use Addison's motion to force the Packers to rotate the coverage, right? A safety has to come down from depth. And I think the Packers were in cover 3. So it's not, I don't think it was exactly box what they were playing, but that safety has to come down into the formation to help defend against the box, and then force the player who's playing outside, right? The flat player to widen out before running a route back in. That's called a drag China route. You run basically a flat route and then come back in to the middle of the field. And because Addison's running full speed across the field, right, you have this safety coming down in coverage, and he has to hedge very far to the outside so he doesn't get beat to the outside and give up an easy first down. When he hedges very far to the outside, it creates a ton of space for Addison to cut off that route and come back in. And it's an easy pitch and catch, and it was 9-10 yards or something like that, maybe more 12 yards on 3rd and 3. Right. And a bunch of yards and a bunch of space after the catch when he caught the ball at roughly the first down marker. Right. So it's how could the Packers possibly let somebody get so wide open on 3rd down and 3? The reason is that the design just put so much stress on the defense that it was so hard for them to be able to cover that route. And then, and I've talked about this week after week too. Going on to the next play to highlight is obviously the Jalen Naylor touchdown, and how Kevin O'Connell uses the threat of Justin Jefferson to attack opposing defenses week after week after week, right? Obviously, opponents are going to be focused on Justin Jefferson. Obviously, he's their number one, it makes sense, right? The Vikings want to get the ball to Justin Jefferson because he's the best wide receiver in the NFL. Opposing defenses know this, so they do what they can to try to stop him, right? It just is obvious. But the Packers are running cover 3 on that touchdown, and the Vikings essentially run a dig route from Justin Jefferson with a post over the top from Jalen Naylor. This is I'll call it cross-country mills is how I've had it referred to. Mills is a post and a dig on the same side. This is obviously coming from different sides. It looks similar to a Yankee concept or something like that as well. But against cover 3, you have a deep safety in the middle of the field, and you basically have the post player run under that deep safety. So he should be running away from that deep safety. He doesn't really have a chance. What needs to happen is the corner to that side of the field or the safety to that side, if he's coming down from depth, which he is in this case, need to be able to play off of that and get underneath that post route to be able to stop it. And when you have Justin Jefferson running a dig to your side, if you're a corner, you're alert for something like a blaze out where you're running a dig and then go over to the corner or a post corner or something like that for Jefferson. So you're trying to stay outside of him and make sure he doesn't kill you with a really well run route. And then if you're the safety trying to nail down on the crossing route, your eyes are naturally going to go to Justin Jefferson. So what do? You run the clear out route with the guy that the defense, isn't thinking about at all in the Vikings' third receiver in Jalen Nailor, right? He's like the fourth or fifth threat in the Vikings passing game behind Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson, and probably Aaron Jones, right? I would consider Aaron Jones maybe more of a threat in terms of something as a check down underneath than Jalen Nailor. So he's wide open because the defense is so focused on Justin Jefferson. You have two players who one of them needs to sink back and be able to make the play on Nailor, aren't able to do it. You could say the safety needs to kind of get over and undercut that route from Nailor, but I really think it's just the way the Vikings use Justin Jefferson to attack the coverage, get those players to keep their eyes on Jefferson, and then beat him over the top. It was just really, really impressive. Another play that didn't even hit that I thought was pretty interesting was the Vikings' first field goal drive, right? So they were down near the goal line and they motioned Trent Sherfield in the backfield. Right? Like the Vikings have motioned, they've done it with Jordan Addison, but they like to motion Justin Jefferson in the backfield in some situations to try to get him a free release out of the backfield on like an option route or something quick. But I thought it was very odd that they were doing it with Trent Sherfield just because of the nature of who Sherfield is as a player. But once I saw the actual execution of the play, and I don't think this was something that picked up because Darnold just straight up missed the throw on the screen. It was a little bit frustrating. Was they motioned Sherfield into the backfield, sent him out to the flat as a lead blocker for Cam Akers on a screen. And honestly, I think this might have gone for a touchdown if Darnold hit the throw. So you have Sherfield out there to block the corner. He's your wide receiver. The reason Sherfield is on the team is because he's a quality blocker at wide receiver, right? And he can do some technical things well as a route runner, right? He's not going to be an explosive player, but his ability as a blocker is what gets him on the field. Weird thing to say for a receiver, but it's true, right? He's a dirty work guy. And he lays a really good block on this corner. It's just the throw's nowhere near Akers. There were two defensive backs who maybe would have had a chance to drive on it and tackle Akers, but this was, I think, a first down play. And at the end of the day, they would have gotten at least 5 or 6 yards to me on this screen. So it's a big win on the goal line where space is hard to come by. So I really like that play design, even if it didn't work out. And then there was another play, which again, kind of subverting expectations for the defense. They ran Aaron Jones on mesh, and you can tell the Vikings wanted to. And whenever you see like a hurry up snap, a lot of times it's because the offense is giving the defense a funky formation, and they don't want to give the defense time to adjust to the formation that they're putting out. So they'll get up to the line quickly, get set, and snap the ball. And they did this on this third down, where they had, I think it was Addison in the backfield. Maybe it was Nailor in the backfield. It doesn't really matter. And then Jones out as a single receiver to the right-hand side, I think. And so they had like 4 Vikings receiving threats to the left, right? Hawkinson, Nailor, Addison, and Jefferson, obviously. And then Jones to the right. And then they just run mesh, right? So the way the Packers sorted it out, I think it was zone. And Hawkinson just does a good job. Jones does a good job running his route, coming underneath, making a catch and getting a first down. It was like a 4-yard gain, right? Nothing particularly impressive, but it kept the chains moving and kept the Vikings, in gear on offense. So just really, really thoughtful and well understood play design from Kevin O'Connell overall. I think, one play I didn't talk about was the near touchdown to Addison. That one wasn't really a design thing, and I won't really get into that. I guess I could talk about it in terms of Darnold's slight misses in the game, which is the topic I'm going to get to. But, Addison just outran a corner in cover 3. I don't know. I thought the corner kind of lost his mind. I didn't really understand how he was playing it. So Addison just runs right by him on this route, right? I guess he sold a short route or like a curl or something like that. But he didn't really even try to sell it all that hard. So Addison runs right by it, Darnold leaves it just a little bit short. Addison has to try to come back and make a play on the ball. And the corner's kind of there at the same time. To me, that would be a really ticky-tack DPI call, so I didn't mind them not calling it. But Addison isn't able to make the contested catch through the play, right? Like, I don't love calling DPI when a quarterback underthrows a ball like that, right? When there was clearly space for him to go deep. And it wasn't like it was like a 60-yard throw or anything like that. So, I just wanted to touch on that play because it was kind of a critical moment in the game, right? Obviously, the Vikings missed the field goal then, so they don't get any points out of that drive. It was kind of a 7-point swing. But, not something that was really a design thing, I think. I more so just wanted to include it as a footnote to the conversation. But if I flip onto that, like, and I'll get to a slight criticism of Darnold, right? But I thought Sam Darnold played at an extremely, extremely high level in this game as well. And really, I thought what stood out to me was both of his processing as a player, right? His ability to get through his progressions and find open receivers, and his pocket movement while processing. So the Vikings, I thought, pass protected pretty well in this game. Like, there were a lot of clean pockets, but they weren't, and Darnold held on to the ball for a long time, I think, in a lot of cases, but they weren't like the most clean pockets in the world, right? It wasn't necessarily a pristine Darnold can sit back there for 8 minutes and throw the ball. Now, this first play I'm going to talk about, he absolutely did that. But, later in the game, like, Risner was getting run by, but he'd push the defender past the quarterback and Darnold would be able to step up and still get a throw off and things like that. Or Blake Brandel got beat in that respect as well. But, Darnold was basically able to make it not matter. And there were even plays like, I think an early third down, he could have taken a sack from Rashawn Gary and just completely slipped out of it and ended up throwing the ball away. Vikings still punt, or maybe that was when they kicked the field goal. But still, turned what would have been a big negative, or, with Kirk Cousins, who knows, even maybe a fumble, into a 0-yard loss, right? Or a 0-yard incompletion. So really impressed with Darnold's ability to get out of sacks, and I've talked about this all year, like, just his movement skills, while not being like an elite runner with the ball in his hands, have been a plus for the Vikings this year. And then if I go through his ability to find receivers while doing that, I think the whole picture becomes really impressive. So that first third down to Hawkinson was just a really textbook example of him being able to work through progressions. There was nothing open, and he opened to the right. So he goes to Jefferson, Addison, and Naylor before coming back to Hawkinson. And even then, he has to hit a second window throw to Hawkinson. The coverage from the Packers on that play was really good, but Hawkinson was able to get off, and they kind of came with the sim pressure. They dropped Lucas Van Ness into coverage, and he kind of mugged Hawkinson, which slowed that route down. But Darnold understands where it's going to go. He doesn't have space between the first set of linebackers, and then once Hawkinson clears the second linebacker, he's able to hit them and make the completion. There was a later play where I think this was one where Brandel got beat pretty badly, where Darnold stepped into the pocket, hit Hawkinson kind of out in the flat, out towards the sideline, and made a completion. Hawkinson ended up wide open on that play, but was still able to get like 12 yards on the gain because Darnold was able to step up past pressure. There was one play that I thought was really impressive. It was another third down where the Vikings sorted out a simulated pressure pre-snap. It kind of looked like zero to me from the Packers, and I don't even remember what they rotated into. It was definitely either cover 3 or Tampa 2, which is, what the Vikings do. A lot of people are trying to steal that, but the key was Darnold was able to process the hot droppers and the windows and throw the ball away from a linebacker over to the middle of the field and move Naylor away from that defender in the middle of the field into space where he could catch the ball and convert the third down. So that processing was really impressive to me because you have a ton of guys up on the line of scrimmage, right? Your thought is, I very much may need to get this ball out hot. Turns out you don't need to get the ball out hot, but you need to navigate all of the players who dropped into coverage and make sure you're not throwing a terrible interception to somebody you didn't see. So just a really impressive ability to stay calm under potential pressure and get that ball out. Then there was another play later in the game where, and this isn't all that difficult to read, but this was on the 2-minute drive where the Vikings got the field goal right before halftime. And just to open that drive, The Packers are in Tampa too, which should be a pretty safe coverage. You want to force an underneath throw in that scenario. And Darnold takes a really aggressive throw to throw the seam to TJ Hawkinson over a linebacker against Tampa 2. Now, the Vikings had double seams on that play. I don't remember if it was Haswajik or what the actual play call was. But, they have Naylor on the seam to one side and Hawkinson on the seam to the other side. The Tampa player was Eric Wilson, former Viking, actually. But, so Eric Wilson opens to Naylor, which means Darnold throws to Hawkinson. It's a pretty easy read, but it's still an aggressive decision in a throw that needs to go up and over the other linebacker. I think it was Edgerrin Cooper, who's the other linebacker. And, get down and give Hawkinson the catch, and the Vikings get 28 yards out of it. And then if I go even later in the game, there was a third down where Naylor converted it for 22 yards. I think it was like 3rd and 8 or something, where Darnold opens to the left, to the front side of the play, and he has Jefferson and Addison, and both of those guys are covered. And when both Jefferson and Addison and Hawkinson, I think was pretty well covered on the play too, are covered on a passing play, you kind of think the Vikings passing offense is dead a little bit. But all the way on the backside, running a dig, which is a place we love to put Justin Jefferson in, is Jalen Naylor, and he's coming across backside on a dig, ends up open. Darnold is able to go 1 to 2 to 3 to the backside dig, make the throw, and it's just a really impressive play from him in terms of, again, staying calm under pressure, hitting a guy who's not your go-to guy, not forcing the ball to the best receiver in the game, and finding a better option who's open for a first down and kind of a critical conversion there. That it was in scoring range, and it might have been on the fringe of field goal range, but it got him a lot closer to the end zone. So all that said, thought it was really high level quarterback play from Darnold. The interception was a forced throw to me. Now, he got kind of taken out by Cam Robinson's foot as well, so that might have had been a little bit of an issue. But honestly, I'll take that back a little bit. I didn't really think the interception to TJ Hawkinson was forced. It's a smash concept, so you have Jefferson running an underneath route and Hawkinson running a deep route. I think there was a window where the corner, Carrington Valentine, who ended up intercepting it, I believe, drove on Jefferson's underneath route, and Darnold just didn't release the ball quickly enough in that scenario. So when he sees Valentine step forward, the ball needs to be out of his hand like immediately, and he hesitates just a little bit of an extra beat, and it allows the corner to fall off underneath it, jump up, and intercept the pass. If he's going to make that throw, it just needs to be released a little bit earlier, which honestly, Darnold's taken really, really good care of the football recently, so it's not that big of a concern to me. It was a little bit of big game hunting. It certainly hurt the Vikings in that it ended up with another Packers touchdown directly after that, because they got the ball at like the 16-yard line or something. So definitely, and that might have been the Packers' actually first touchdown of the game. Right. I think it was. So, you're up big. You probably want to play a little bit more conservative with the ball, but at the end of the day, like, you're going to need to score points and win the ball downfield, push the ball downfield against the best teams in the NFL, which is who you're going to face in the playoffs. So that one's not too big of a concern for me. The concern I do have is that a number of Darnold's throws are high. That last big dig to Naylor, I thought, was a little bit high in the air. There was one to Jefferson very late in the game where it could have been picked. It was a 3rd and forever, and maybe it was like 3rd and 16 or something like that. And it was after the, I believe, crazy Jefferson catch that ended up getting called back. Or no, I'm sorry. This was on the missed field goal drive where you have 2 negative runs in a row. And Jefferson is winning on a comeback route. He's short of the sticks, but he's still getting 10 yards. That puts you a lot closer. A 33-yard field goal is an easy make, right? And with Justin Jefferson, you never know after the catch. He might slither his way for a first down somehow, especially if you have defenders kind of crashing down hard to try to tackle him. And Darnold just sails the ball. It's over Jefferson's head. Jefferson might have tipped it. Again, I didn't watch it live, so I didn't really necessarily get the close-up of the play, but it also drops off of or hits off of a defensive back's hand, right? So it's a little bit in harm's way because he missed the throw high. You need to get that throw down a little bit lower. There was a throw on a dig to Addison over the middle of the field that again was high that Addison had to elevate and make a really nice leaping catch on. for a pretty significant chunk. But, just slight misses high, I would say, are a consistent theme for Darnold and a little bit of a concern moving forward if this offense is going to stutter out. I've referenced him a couple times, but Justin Jefferson also deserves a shout out for this game early on. Obviously, all of the focus, I would say, that the Packers were putting on Justin Jefferson allowed the Vikings to adjust and move the ball through other players like Addison and Naylor. Obviously, the Naylor touchdown is the perfect example of that. But as the game went on, I think the Packers realized that they couldn't overfocus on Justin Jefferson with the other threats that the Vikings had. So they really, it gave Justin Jefferson more opportunities in the second half. And the Vikings did a pretty good job of getting him engaged with screens and quick passes and that sort of thing in this game. But really, some of the big plays came in the second half. So the first one was a big screen that he caught, and it was like 2nd down and 8 after they kind of backed themselves up. I think this one might have been, no, it wasn't after the Cam Robinson holding. Sorry, I'm just trying to think about it. But, they'd back themselves up a little bit. They get a big screen to Justin Jefferson. There's really nice blocking from Jordan Addison out in front of that. And I thought Jordan Addison was actually phenomenal as a blocker in this game, which is not something that you consistently think of him doing. But he was like really, really impressive. Like, he's a dog out there. Just being willing to be physical in a number of phases. You saw that in so many different runs and also on this Jefferson big screen. There was another tight window throw that Darnold had to Jefferson that was the one that ended up going for 37 yards, right? It's just a quick in route or a glance or whatever you want to call it by Jefferson. He clears the linebacker. He's before the other linebacker. Darnold fits the ball in there. Jefferson catches it in stride and goes for like 20 plus yards after the catch because of his ability to accelerate as it goes. There was a catch that didn't count that obviously everybody's talked about. It's like one of the possible catches of the year from Jefferson, even though it didn't even count because Cam Robinson had the holding. It was probably through contact and defensive pass interference. And who knows, maybe he hurt himself by actually catching the ball. So a DPI flag didn't get thrown to kind of negate the holding call on that play, right? And then at the very end of the game, it was a really impressive catch and a really impressive tight window throw from Darnold on the rollout that Jefferson is running across the field. He has to run full speed. He has to make a catch. And critically, he makes the catch while going down to the ground. So the clock keeps running, right? Because if he makes that catch and goes out of bounds, the clock stops. The Packers get to save a timeout. Making that catch was just really impressive to me. So overall, another very good game for Justin Jefferson, where he hasn't necessarily lit up the stat sheet. I feel like that was the story of a lot of his season. And then the last couple weeks, he kind of took over a little bit as he played defenses that weren't as focused on stopping him, I guess I would say. But now, even when the Packers focused on stopping him early in the game, he was able to turn it around and have a huge second half to help propel the Vikings to victory. And if I flip it over to something I haven't really talked about, which is the run game, I think that, generally the Vikings ran the ball pretty okay in this game. It's kind of weird. It was an up and down performance. I think that early on they were getting pretty good push from the interior. Like the first play of the game is a really nice run for Aaron Jones. You had a couple other really successful runs from Aaron Jones there. And then at the end of the game, you had a big Cam Akers run. I think... Was that before the touchdown, or am I thinking of something different? That might have been the one before the screen pass where they ended up kicking the field goal. But you had a really nice Cam Akers run on outside zone where Dalton Risner did a really good job climbing to Eric Wilson and kind of sealing him off. You had the Aaron Jones 13-yard run, which was fantastic blocking from the tight ends. It was Oliver Munt, and then also a fantastic block laid by Jordan Addison coming in and kind of crack blocking a guy and leaving the lane for Aaron Jones. So they kind of found a groove with outside runs at the end of the game, but they did have an issue with negative plays in the run game as well. And I think a lot of that was due to Edgerrin Cooper, the Packers rookie linebacker. who I thought, had a really, really good game, especially in run defense. And the thing that just stuck out to me is how quick he was to trigger and his ability to beat blockers to spots. It was like, and I posted this on BlueSky, but he's just like Ivan Pace if you gave him the power-up mushroom, right? Like he just ate a Mario mushroom, and just grew, because he's about the same weight, actually, but he's like 5 inches taller than Pace and like has a lot longer arms. But his ability to trigger and get past blockers, it's like every TFL he was making or every good play in the run game, he just outran Cam Robinson to the spot. He outran Blake Brandel to the spot. He outran Dalton Risner to the spot. He outran Josh Oliver to the spot. He just beat guys to his spots, got into the backfield, and made a nice play. So that was really impressive to see from a rookie linebacker. I think playing with that level of play speed and that level of recognition against the run is a really good thing. I think probably like Ivan Pace, he's a little bit susceptible in pass protection or in pass coverage. So I wouldn't, crown him as like the next big thing as a linebacker. I think he's just an explosive player moving forward, which is certainly a big asset for the Packers, but it's not like he's a dynamic, I don't necessarily see him on the track as a dynamic, like Fred Warner-esque player. Right. But I see him as being a very good player and somebody the Vikings have to watch out for, especially moving forward, later, as his career goes on. So yeah, that's pretty much the offense. I did shout out Jordan Addison for his blocking already. That was kind of the last note that I have here, but just really impressive. And I think the phrase that I've heard that sticks out to me is he is willing to stick his face in the fan, right? He's willing to put his face right in the fan and get chopped up in the run game, and go after guys as a blocker. Even if he isn't the biggest guy, he's successful because he's willing to put the effort in. And I think that really showed in this game in a way that hadn't really stood out to me previously. So maybe that's on me for not watching as closely as I should in terms of Addison blocking. And again, wide receiver blocking is like pretty far down the list of what you want them to do, but it's important to have guys who do it well. And that can really send an offense over the top, I would say. So it was great to see from him. Also, shout out to Justin Jefferson for his blocking on the Cam Akers screen touchdown. I don't know if I covered that. I really didn't, but Jefferson threw a great block downfield on the corner on that touchdown. Like he got after it there as well. Garrett Bradbury blocked 2 people on that screen. It was just a really impressive play by those 2 guys to spring Cam Akers for the touchdown. And obviously all of those points mattered as the Vikings won by just 2. So if we flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, there's a bunch to go over there as well. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because the story of the Viking season has basically been them jumping out to big leads and then almost giving them away, but not really almost giving them away, but they almost gave them away. And the defense, kind of started out really hot and was really shutting down what the opponent was trying to do. And then they felt like they kind of let up a little bit, or they got figured out a little bit by the opposing offense. And they scored a bunch of points, almost got back into the game, but they didn't really get back into the game because, and I've said this like 3 times now, but it is exactly how it feels, right? Because you have all these opportunities for this opposing team, and then they get an onside kick, and the Vikings recover the onside kick, or they don't recover the onside kick in the Bears case, but they still are able to shut down the Bears and win in overtime. And at the end of the day, the win probability graph still looks really good for the Vikings, but we didn't feel good about it at the time. So it's kind of this weird scenario, right? And I'm going to try to go through the game here from start to finish and try to figure out exactly what I thought, kind of allowed the Packers to get back into the game and maybe how that impacts the Vikings going forward. So the first thing I think that was critical to me in this game, and ultimately the thing that I think set up the Vikings for the win in this game, was their success on 3rd down in the first half. Now they went 3 for 8 on the Packers went 3 for 8 on 3rd down in the first half. They went, or 3rd and 4th down, I should say, right there, the 1 4th down failure. They were a lot more successful in the second half. I think they went 5 for 7. So pretty good overall in that they were something like 8 for 15 on 3rd and 4th down combined in this game, which is almost 50%, which is a really good rate. 2 of those first half first downs were on run plays to Josh Jacobs, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But what I really want to focus in on is the 1 for 6 that they went in the passing game, and the only thing they converted was the very first third down opportunity that they had. Dontavian Wicks kind of won on a comeback route against Stephon Gilmore. Gilmore still had pretty tight coverage, but Wicks was able to make the catch. It was like an 8-yard gain on 3rd and 6. After that, they went 0 for 5 in the first half, and that allowed the Vikings to go up 20-3, right? Because the Vikings offense, kind of talked about it a little bit, stalled out early. The defense kept them in the game. That 3rd and 4th down stop while the Packers were driving, critical, because the Packers only scored 3 points in the first half. The Vikings were able to come out of the half, get a really impressive touchdown drive, and now they're up 20-3, and the Packers have to play from behind. They can't use the run game that I thought was relatively effective as the weapon that it is for them, right? They have to pass with Jordan Love, and he wasn't particularly effective. Now, obviously, the Packers moved the ball late, and we'll get to that as well. But if we focus on those third downs, the first one came in the goal line, and it held the Packers to the field goal on the first one, right? And the Packers are trying to run mesh. The Vikings are running, I charted it actually as quarters, with man coverage kind of locked on the backside. So they have 3 receivers. To the right-hand side, they have the running back and tight end. To the left, and Metellus is locked in man coverage on the tight end. Luke Musgrave. Cashman is locked in coverage on the back. But on the right-hand side, the Vikings kind of play box to it, right? So they have Byron Murphy kind of press and take a vertical route. They pass off the second vertical route, or they really pass off the first vertical route to the safety level, Bynum and Harrison Smith. And then Murphy and Gilmore kind of take the second vertical route. And then the in-breaking route, which ends up being a mesh route, goes to Gilmore, who's the furthest inside, right? That kind of reads like box to me. So you have that mesh, and when you're playing man coverage to mesh, which is how this definitely played out for Josh Metellus, you're in danger because obviously the point is to get the receivers to almost run into each other. You want the corners to kind of collide with the defenders to kind of collide with each other, right? So to avoid that, Josh Metellus has to fall off of his coverage, and he's running with Musgrave out like the 5-yard line, and he has to drift all the way back to the 2, right? But then, so the point there is to create space for Musgrave for him to be able to turn up the field and get past Metellus. Well, when Love throws the ball to Musgrave, Metellus is able to come back down and contact Musgrave at the 5, preventing him from getting forward. He only gets to the 4. The Packers don't feel comfortable going for it on 4th and 4 at the 4, and they kick a field goal. You saved by Metellus being able to drift off and then come back downhill and make the play on Musgrave. You saved 3 points. I thought that was really impressive. The next one was the 3rd and 4th down combined failure. And on that 3rd down, the Packers come out fast. Like I talked about the Vikings coming out fast and running, having a receiver in the backfield and running mesh, the Packers tried to do a pretty similar thing here. And this was actually before the Vikings did it. So they had Jaden Reed in the backfield, and then they had the running back, I think, out as part of a bunch formation, and then they had a receiver coming across the field from the other side. I think it was Dobbs, right, who made this catch. So they come out 4 strong as well, right? So you have 4 players to one side for the offense and only 1 player to the other side on the defensive side, on the offensive side of the ball. That's very difficult for a defense to sort out. Even playing man coverage, when they ran up quickly to the line of scrimmage, whoever's in man coverage on the running back has to realize, oh, the running back's running out wide. And whoever's man coverage on the receiver out of the backfield has to realize, oh, Jaden Reed is in the backfield, right? So I was assigned to cover Jaden Reed on this play. I need to make sure I'm coming into the backfield. And there was a little bit of confusion from the Vikings defense. So the receiver Dobbs on the nub side, right, the one side of the 4x1 runs an underneath route. And the Vikings are in what I call cover 1 robber, right? So you have the safety Harrison Smith coming down from depth. You have a linebacker in man coverage, usually on the running back in this play. So in 1 robber, if you have an underneath route or a shallow route, a lot of times the corner to that side will pass it off to a the underneath player, whether it's the rat or the robber, right? Well, it's called a rat if it's a linebacker, it's the robber if it's the safety. So Harrison Smith takes the underneath route from Dobbs, but he's at a disadvantageous angle at 3rd and 4. Like he's trying to come down from depth like 10 plus yards behind the line of scrimmage, and Dobbs is running a route like 2 yards past the line of scrimmage. So that's the route that Love throws to. But there's another route on this play where there's some confusion because both Byron Murphy and Blake Cashman, to my eye, go after Jayden Reed, who's the back coming into the backfield, even if he's not a running back. Hard to know unless you're in the room who's right. At the end of the day, Cashman kind of ends up double covering tight end, running a vertical route, but also Dontavian Wicks has a curl route over the middle of the field. So the way the distribution works, it probably should have been Murphy on Wicks, although I'm not exactly sure. So there really should be man coverage on Wicks in this case. There doesn't end up being that coverage on Wicks. So you have to have the so really Gilmore probably should have been able to play that. Love would have had that over the middle of the field, but first he saw Smith coming down from distance and threw the ball to Dobbs. Murphy on the play had great eyes, seeing in the backfield that Dobbs was getting the ball and came off and made the tackle for just a gain of 2 to stop him and create 4th and 2 on that play. So really a lot of credit to Byron Murphy, even if there was some coverage confusion on the Vikings defense, for going out there, working through the confusion and making a great play in that situation and stopping the ball short of the sticks. And then the 4th down was a situation where Murphy kind of came up big again. I mean, at the end of the day, Jayden Reed was open on this play. But I think what's kind of interesting about the Vikings' use of man coverage is that in a lot of ways, playing defense is about making life difficult on the offense. Obviously, you want to dominate the offense. You want to crush the offense. You want to win on every single rep if you're the defense. But you're not going to at the end of the day, right? As the saying goes, I'm sure I've probably said this again in this podcast, the other guys get paid too. And, you know, the Packers have some pretty good players on offense. Their receiving core, while it doesn't have any stars, has a number of guys who can make plays and get open. Jordan Love can certainly make throws, even if he's not necessarily all that consistent with it. So, you know, and this is something that maybe a little bit more applies to college, but the reason quarters became such a big thing in college is that a lot of times running quarters plays would force the quarterback to throw the ball to the outside, to the furthest outside receiver. And that's almost your goal. Playing quarters is if the opposing quarterback is going to chuck up vertical routes to the guy furthest away from him all day, we're in a pretty good position, especially in college where you don't have high level quarterback play, or high school where you don't have like super high level quarterback play, right? That falls apart a little bit in the NFL where almost every guy there can make throws all around the field to any part of the field against any sort of coverage. But, you know, it still makes it life difficult. The opposing quarterback has to execute on a consistent basis to be able to make those throws. Man coverage is a similar thing. In man, you're playing a lot tighter to the receivers than you are in a zone coverage where you can pick apart holes and use design to get guys free. There are certainly design things that get players free in man, but for the initial part of the route stem, it's a lot closer. So if you're getting good pass rush, and I would say the Vikings were getting pretty good pass rush here, you're forcing the opposing quarterback into difficult throws. In this case, on the 4th down, Reed is running a slant. He beats Murphy inside. He has leverage inside. You would hope that the rat, who was Blake Cashman in this play, would be able to give help on inside leverage. Like that's kind of the design of how man coverage works. But he was drawn by Jordan Love's eyes. He did a good job with his eyes. Still, Reed is trying to run away from Murphy, right? So Love can't leave the ball behind Reed or it lets Murphy get back into the play. He has to lead Reed. He leads Reed. The throw is a little low. Reed has to dive for the ball. He's not able to bring it in. Should it have been a catch? Absolutely. Would hopefully most of the receivers on the Vikings make that catch? Like Justin Jefferson, obviously. Jordan Addison, I would say obviously. Jalen Nailor has obviously been up and down, right? And we would hope, I think Packers fans would want to consider Jayden Reed in the higher tier of receivers, right? But he's not able to make the catch. It goes through his hands. It falls incomplete. Playing man coverage made life difficult on the Packers in that scenario because Love had to lead his receiver. His receiver had to try to dive for the catch based on where the ball was thrown. So because of those two things, it leads to a fourth down drop and a failure by the Packers, and the Vikings get the ball back and they prevent the Packers from scoring points. So that's a win in man coverage, even if it ended up with an open receiver to me. Then the next third down, I think it was a 3rd and 10, or maybe I'm mixing this up with a 3rd and 5 that they had later in the game. But the Packers run a motion with Bull Melton across the screen. They have him run a wheel route. They have the other two receivers, Wicks and Reed, I assume. I'm sorry, not Wicks, Dobbs and Reed run deep crossers. And I think, the interesting thing on that was Murphy did a really good job following Dobbs across the formation. And I don't really think Love looked anywhere different. Like Murphy was over top of Melton's route. Sorry, I think I might have just called him Dobbs, but he was over top of Melton's route the whole time. There was safety help from Cam Bynum. Love just leaves the throw super long. It has no shot of being caught. It was good man coverage by Murphy to prevent that from working on third down. But also, you had the other corners, kind of get stacked at the line of scrimmage. Both Griffin and Gilmore on this play got stacked by their opposing receivers. But the veteran savvy from those two guys, I think, really stood out on this play. So they have the opposing receivers run past them. The Vikings are playing 2-man in this case. So they both have corners over the top, or they both have safeties over the top to help with the vertical route. And they also understand that based on the release that the players are using, that they're probably running crossing routes across the field. And you can see this really well from Griffin on the play, where he turns inside and runs underneath to the point where Reed is going to run after he breaks. And he runs basically across the field, leaves 5+ yards of separation to take an arcing path underneath to get back to where Reed is, as opposed to trying to follow Reed vertical up the field and then cut when he cuts. Gilmore does I would argue, a little bit better job of recovering and is completely undercut the route by Dobbs, or maybe it was Wicks. I don't really remember. And so if Love had tried to throw that with anticipation, seeing that his receiver had stacked Gilmore, it would have been picked by an undercutting Gilmore. The Griffin play would have been a bit more of a contested catch if he had tried to throw with anticipation, but still got covered at the end of the day by those players because they had veteran savvy and an understanding of route combinations, which is something I don't think the Vikings had from their corners last year, which is why I don't think they played any man coverage at all last year. So I really think that benefits the Vikings moving forward, and that level of play was a really positive sign for me, and why they're comfortable playing man coverage even if they don't have the most physically impressive corners in the world at this point, right? We all know Gilmore's past his prime, and he's got on a couple plays, but I think everybody ultimately in the Vikings secondary has got on a few plays. It's just the consistency and the ability to bounce back when they get beaten every once in a while is what has kept the Vikings in all of these football games and winning all of these football games to me. And then if I flip it over, coverage works in tandem with pass rush. You can't cover for more than 3 seconds as a secondary. It's really, really hard to do that on a consistent basis. Which is why if teams have no pass rush, I go back to the 2020 and the 2021 Vikings, where they weren't able to generate a pass rush with 4 rushers. And even the 2022 Vikings outside of Danielle Hunter, and even last year's Vikings outside of Danielle Hunter, weren't able to generate a pass rush with 4 players, right? And when you only have Danielle Hunter being the only guy who was consistent across those seasons. And I guess Zarius Smith was really good for the 2022 season as well. But, you only have one guy. It's easy for offenses to shut that down. The Vikings don't just have one guy on this team. They have Jonathan Greenard, sure, and he's been the focal point, and he's been absolutely one of the best pass rushers in the NFL, but they also have Van Ginkel. They're also able to send Cashman on blitzes. Dallas Turner's kind of come on a little bit in recent games. Pat Jones has had times throughout the season, and, he's dealing with an injury right now. It looks like he's going to be able to play against the Lions, but or it's kind of still in question. But those guys getting to the passer, forcing throwaways, forcing errant throws has also been key, working in concert with the coverage on this man coverage. And Jonathan Greenard, I think, was the best example in this game. He didn't show up on the stat sheet at all, but he was the Vikings' best pass rusher in this game. One of the early third downs, right? It was a near Harrison Smith interception. I think it was probably the Packers' second drive of the game, right? Where the fourth down failure was on their third drive. So the Jacobs fumble was the first drive, and then this third down was the second drive. The field goal, I think, was the third drive, and then the fourth down failure was their fourth drive. But Greenard just beats Rashad Walker. I'm sorry, Rasheed Walker. I completely just screwed up his name, but the left tackle Walker, just outside, runs right around him. I mean, has a great get off of the line of scrimmage, hits Love as he's throwing. It was covered well by Murphy anyway, but the ball is behind the receiver Love's targeting. It goes almost straight to Harrison Smith, who's almost able to make a diving catch for an interception, right? It leads to a punt. The Vikings get a missed field goal out of their opportunity after the punt. They would have been in scoring range if Smith was able to come into that interception, but just phenomenal rush by Greenard impacting the play. There was a later third down where the Packers did a good job of attacking the Vikings man coverage, ran a stack concept that got, I think it was Reed, good separation against Byron Murphy because Murphy ran into Wicks both Reed and Wicks were running vertical. I think Reed was actually first, but Reed cuts inside on a dig route and Wicks continues to go vertical. Murphy has to try to get across Wicks to get to Reed and runs into Wicks down the field. Ends up creating a wide open space for Wicks. But what happened was the Vikings ran a stunt, and this wasn't on Greenard specifically, but Greenard does come into the play later, that got Cashman free up the middle, I believe. And then Greenard was able to contain, right? So Greenard was doing a lot of containing in the second half of this game, and it worked out really, really well with how the Vikings were playing stunts because he was able to get in Love's face and alter his path even if he didn't end up with a sack. So the stunt gets a free runner up the middle, forces Love to bail out of the pocket to his right. Love still has Reed open as Murphy tries to catch up, but Greenard gets in his face and gets a tip on the ball, which allows Murphy to make a play on Reed that contacts Reed. It probably would have been defensive pass interference in a normal situation. Reed is very mad after the play. You can see him gesturing like it's pass interference, but Greenard made it tip the ball. So it's not pass interference because you can mug the receiver all you want if one of the defensive linemen tips the ball. When I started that, my note actually was on a different play where Byron Murphy did get called for DPI, and Greenard just roasted Rasheed Walker again. To me, got a hit on Jordan Love. It was a tight coverage throw. I really did not agree with the defensive pass interference call. It was like a 12-yard gain. I think it was second down or something. But Greenard again came up big, got a hit on that, just nearly misses a sack. If Love holds onto the ball a half second longer, which he probably should have, rather than releasing the throw. There was the Blake Cashman sack, right? The one where Cashman was credited solo. The Vikings get upfield pretty quickly. Cashman is on a blitz, gets upfield, kind of past the linebacker and comes back around and sacks Jordan Love. Jordan Love, with the rush, there was good coverage on the back end, has to try to step up into the pocket and wants to scramble, but Jonathan Greenard is right there on the contain. He's not able to make the tackle, but Cashman's able to get back into the play, get the sack for 0 yards. And then the Dallas Turner sack on the Packers' last drive of the game was another example of Greenard's contain coming into play pretty heavily. So Dallas Turner does a really good job. Bull rushes Walker back into Love's lap. Love tries to bail to his right. Guess who's there? Jonathan Greenard containing after a stunt. So Turner was able to disengage and then run Love down as Love escapes because he had to try to avoid Greenard as Greenard was containing him. So again, just a really impressive day from Greenard, not only as a pass rusher where he got multiple hits, I thought, on Love and disrupted multiple throws, but also as a contained player, kind of a very do your job type of role, right? Not where you're going to get necessarily the flashy sack. So I was pretty impressed with that. And I was impressed with the pass rush overall, even if they didn't put up, I think, tons of pressure numbers in this game, I would bet. So the last pass rush thing I wanted to talk about was a great stunt. Oh, and there was another stunt, I think, where Greenard got a hit. It was a flush stunt. So the Vikings in the second half really were playing a lot of 5-0 fronts where you have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage and you're blitzing all of them. And, it was in a sub package. So it's often the 4 edges plus Cashman on the line of scrimmage. And, this package is something I covered pretty extensively when Flores came to the Vikings, because it was a really big thing for what he was doing in Miami and New England. And it's really how the Vikings like to generate pass rush and attack the opposing offensive line when they're not like blitzing on early downs and things like that. This is kind of more of a late down thing for them. And the key is, if you only keep 5 in to protect, which a lot of times teams like to get 5 out into the route, your offensive linemen have to block guys one-on-one. So you want to stunt a lot, because as guys are trying to do their one-on-one matchups, it becomes a lot harder for them to pass off the games from the defensive line. So on this play, you had, it was probably Ward as the 0 tech and Greenard as the 3 technique, with Cashman as the opposite 3 technique. They both crash down and do a really good job of occupying the opposing offensive lineman to get Cashman up the middle as a free runner, basically at Love. Love sees this, wants to bail in the pocket, but Andrew Van Ginkel has kind of roasted Zach Tom, the right tackle, who's gotten a lot of credit for being a good player this year, but Van Ginkel definitely got the better of him on this play, got around, and Cashman and Van Ginkel share a 10-yard sack, kind of shut down the Packers' drive in that case. So, just really good stunt. The 5-0 stuff was impressive in this game. If you have an opponent that wants to get 5 out in the route, if they don't trust their running back and pass protection all that much, I think the Lions are going to be an example of that, where they would have trusted David Montgomery a lot. I don't know if they have the same level of faith in Jahmyr Gibbs, and Gibbs is such an explosive threat that you want to get him out in the route. It's something you can attack their offensive line with. So, moving on from kind of the passing game for the Packers, right, or at least the successes the Vikings had against the Packers passing game, to the run defense. I thought the Vikings run defense, to be honest with you, struggled a little bit in this game, maybe a bit more than the box score suggests. Josh Jacobs averaged like 4 yards per carry, but I would say his success rate was really high. I don't really have a great way to look it up. And maybe I'm not crediting a number of the stops that the Vikings had, right? They were able to generate negative plays. But really, I thought a couple third downs early in the game kind of stood out to me as ways the Vikings still struggle to play run defense, even if they're really, really good on early downs, in my opinion. So I think there's a big difference with the way the Vikings are able to play with their 5 down front. That would be Bullard and Phillips and like Tillery or Redmond or somebody like that in the game, with 2 edge rushers, and their ability to play in lighter personnel packages. In like 3rd and forever situations, Jihad Ward and them do a pretty good job of stopping the run, or at least preventing massive gains, right? But if the Vikings try to go into that in 3rd and medium, or try to have, kind of 4 down linemen in a medium distance kind of situation, they struggle a little bit, because they like to play with 2 high safeties, or show 2 high shells, or show a 1 high shell and then back off into 2 high shells. So there's a lot of disguise involved on the back end of the defense. So you don't really have the level of run support from safeties, from Bynum and Smith, that you might in a cover 3 defense, right? In a pure cover 3 defense. At the same time, they also play light, typically, because they love to have Josh Metellus on the field, and he's great in a number of scenarios, and he did an admirable job filling in as a linebacker. But if you're going to play with only 4 down linemen, a lot of times you only have Cashman and Metellus behind that as the 2 linebackers. So that leaves you susceptible to run plays in the box, even if you have Harrison Phillips in, which I think they did on a couple of the 3rd down runs from Jacobs. And there was another 3rd down run that went for 13 yards. It was 3rd and 1, that got called back due to an illegal formation, I think. And that was the play before the ball that Murphy did a good job covering Bo Melton on. But, those kind of runs are a little bit of a weak point for the Vikings, and the Packers exploited that a little bit, I thought, in this game. They did it on the first drive, and then Jerry Tillery obviously made a credit to Jerry Tillery, punched the ball out on the fumble later, but the Packers were kind of moving the ball on the ground on that drive. And they were kind of moving the ball on the ground in the first half overall. So certainly something that I think is interesting to watch for moving forward, if teams are able to continue to play in tight games, which most of the games in the playoffs should be tight games, the Vikings might struggle a little bit if they're not in a like defined, okay, this is 1st and 10 and our opponent has, like 12 personnel on the field so we can put all the big bodies, or it's 4th and 1 and the Bears are trying to run some kind of play and we have all of our big bodies on the field. If it's like that 2nd and 5 or the third and 3 or something like that, where you have lighter personnel and you're trying to play the pass a little bit more, you're going to be able to get run on a little bit. And I think that's a little bit of a weakness for the Vikings defense, even if their run defense overall is very good. Like at the end of the day, I think that's a weakness for almost any defense in the NFL. And I'd rather allow some decent runs than a big pass, but those are the types of situations where you can allow your opponent to have a consistent success if you're not able to stop up and make a play in some of those scenarios. I thought the Packers did a really good job with the run game. I mean, I think Jacobs is a really good back. I think they have a pretty solid run game design, and they had a really nice counterplay that they ran a couple times where they put Jacobs in motion with a lead blocker on the other side. So they motioned him behind Love, who was in shotgun, snapped the ball, and handed it off to Jacobs. And it got the Vikings a couple times on power. So I wanted to point that out as a little bit of an interesting design. Creates a little bit of confusion for the linebackers when he moves, just a little bit of hesitation for them to get to the ball and allow your guys to have easier blocks. So run game for the Packers, I was pretty impressed by and a little bit concerned with the Vikings struggles there. And now I want to get into their comeback a little bit. So to be honest, I talked about kind of the high leverage nature of playing man coverage on 3rd down. And in the ways it was successful for the Vikings in the first half, I think the Packers were just able to beat it a little bit in the second half. So I mentioned there was a comeback route by Wicks in the first half. That was the only conversion the Packers had there. There were like 3 just barely conversions on 3rd down that the Packers had in the second half. There was a crossing route that Murphy was in tight coverage on that I want to say it was Reed, although it might have been Dobbs, made a really nice catch on. There were not consecutive, but 2 plays against Shaq Griffin. One was an out route. The other was an in route where the receiver caught the ball and just barely made it past the sticks. I mean, he was almost coming back behind the sticks in both of those situations where it was just barely a first down to me. There was another high leverage 3rd down that got the Packers the ball on the 1 yard line. And I think this was on their final drive where it was just the Vikings were trying to blitz, and I believe it was cover 3. I charted it as cover 3. It looks kind of man coverage-ish. It's really hard to kind of tell in some of these situations, but I want to say it was Dobbs again, but let me check that real quick. It was Wicks who kind of created separation from Griffin in a one-on-one situation where Griffin was trying to play over the top and stop the touchdown in cover 3, and Wicks kind of won on a comeback, and then it was almost able to extend for the touchdown. But at the end of the day, like it's kind of hard, right? Because you see a lot of these plays and they're very tight margin plays where the Vikings are close to kind of winning on them, and it's like, okay, they let up points. A lot of these plays are the reason that they let up points. But at the end of the day, how different was their performance from what it is in the first half, right? Did they just see kind of the other side of the coin? And I think the reality is that's kind of how it works in the playoffs against good teams. Like, this was a competitive game. The Packers are a pretty good football team. I don't think they're as good of a football team as the Vikings. I think the fact that the Vikings beat them twice this season and had commanding leads in both games is a big indicator that the Packers aren't as good as the Vikings. But I also don't think they're a bad football team. So, you're playing tight games, and they're going to end up close. And there are going to be plays on the margins like this where you have swings where the Vikings get all of those successes in the first half, and then they have failures come back to them in the second half, right? And they hit heads a bunch on the coin flip, or they hit the same side they called on the coin flip, and then they lost the coin flips a lot of times in the second half. So, it's a little bit like there are sustainable parts to it. To me, right, I think the fact that the Vikings have been a phenomenal defense all year, like I'm not saying this is a bad defense or they've gotten a ton of luck, and they force a lot of their own luck on defense, but against the best teams in the NFL, there are going to be times when they get beat. So we probably can expect that moving forward in the playoffs and against the Lions, who are an absolutely phenomenal offense. It's just kind of hard to reconcile with. And we have to understand that the Vikings offense is playing also some really good defenses on the opposite side of the ball. And they're going to do the same thing because they're a really good offense, but sometimes they're going to get beat by their opponents as well. So it's kind of it's a hard thing to reconcile with, right? Because I think we want clear answers to say, oh, this Vikings defense is the best in the NFL, and they should be the reason that they're going to win all these football games. Or, the Vikings combination of offense and defense is really phenomenal, and it gives them an advantage in the playoffs against anybody that they were going to face. But I think the reality is that both teams are good, and whoever they're going to go up against is going to have answers for what the Vikings, or is going to try to have answers for what the Vikings are going to do on defense. And there's going to be a little bit of variance and a little bit of luck to what the actual result is. I did want to cover a couple other plays, a couple other plays I went through that I thought were kind of bust by the defense. The first was really interesting to me. It was a drop 8 cover 3 play, and Tucker Kraft kind of went up the seam and nobody followed him from the like underneath level of the defense up the seam. He ended up wide open. It was a 35-yard gain, right? And kind of a really frustrating play from the defense because somebody, and it might have been Ivan Pace widening out, it might have been the safety underneath, I think it was Harrison Smith, who needed to carry this guy up the seam, but it was just kind of spot drop coverage that allowed too much space. And the Vikings will run some spot drop coverage, but that's the reason you don't like it, because it has massive holes, and it can allow big types of plays like that. There was another play against man coverage that ended up being like an 18 or 20-yard gain that I thought was a good design. And I think it attacked Gilmore a little bit on a dig route. But the thing is, the Vikings were running cover 1 robber, and the Packers ran a post with a dig route coming from the other side. So kind of cross-country Mills-ish, right? And the read for the quarterback is basically high to low. It's hard for a corner in man coverage to cover crossing routes in the middle of the field. That's why you have the rat and the robber there. Stephon Gilmore lost pretty significantly. He was very far behind the player. And I don't remember who it was offhand on the play, but I bet he was also expecting inside help from the robber, Harrison Smith, coming down over the middle of the field. And if you remember, it was the Bears game a couple weeks ago, Monday Night Football. There was an almost interception that Harrison Smith had coming down as a robber on a throw on a dig route across the middle of the field. I think Gilmore's kind of expecting inside help there due to that player, but the post by the Packers held Harrison Smith in his position, and he wasn't able to come down on the route, right? So that's good offensive design. It's also a situation where where the offense wins and they get paid too. So would you like a lot stickier coverage, to be honest, from Gilmore on that play? Yes, absolutely. But, the Vikings don't have prime 2009 Darrelle Revis on this defensive roster, right? And that's just a reality that we're going to have to live with, I think, as we move forward into the playoffs. I think all of the corners are good, and I think they're all playing at a high level. And I don't know if I'd say any one of them is a liability over any of the other, to be honest with you, because I think they all have their ups and downs. I would say that the most impactful one to me has been Murphy. I would say that I would rank Stephon Gilmore second. I think he generally has been stickier and has dealt with a little bit more difficult assignments than what Shaq Griffin has, who I think I find Shaq Griffin out of position quite a bit on plays where he doesn't get targeted. So it's, but again, all three of them ended up out of position sometimes, but all three of them also have the veteran savvy to recover and get back in position and prevent, plays where they lose a little bit from becoming massive, big game-winning plays for the opposing team. So I think the Vikings are in generally a pretty good spot, but they have a little bit of weakness there. It's probably the biggest weakness on the defense is the corner's ability, but also, I think I heard a stat where the Vikings are the best in the NFL in EPA per play when they play man coverage. So like at the end of the day, it's working really, really well for this defense overall. So there's a lot of hedging by me there, right? But I don't think there's a 100% clear answer. And hopefully I'm not repeating myself time after time after time. And it kind of makes sense a little bit how I dive through and judge the Vikings, secondary and specifically corners. But with all that said, still a really impressive win for the Vikings. It gave them the opportunity to go into Detroit on Sunday Night Football and play the Lions in a game where winner takes the number 1 seed, right? And you absolutely want the number 1 seed. There's no question. And honestly, in my opinion, getting a playoff bye should count as a win for the head coach and the team that gets the playoff bye, because it functionally is a win. You have to, if you don't get a bye, you have to win a game to make the divisional round. It counts as a win. You have to play one less roughly coin flip game if you assume playoff teams are all really good, which they're not always all really good. But I think there's a lot of strength in the NFC this year. And it's kind of shown by the fact that the Vikings are going to be either a 14-win wildcard team, or the Lions will be a 14-win wildcard team, right? So it's great to be able to play for the bye. It would be awesome if the Vikings are able to capture the bye. And I think if you go back to their one of their 2 losses in the season, right, the week 6 loss, or no, I'm sorry, week 7 loss. It was the 6th game of the year to the Lions. You see a game that ended up really, really close at the end. The Lions needed to go down the field, kick a game-winning field goal to win the game. The Vikings had the ball with the ability to shut the door on the Lions and just weren't able to connect on a pass to Justin Jefferson, ended up punting, and the Lions ended up coming down and win the game. Now, my memory of that game, and before going back into the box score, because I was actually at the game, is a little bit weird, because I kind of remember feeling like, and I'm sure everybody who watched it live or watched it on TV felt the same thing, like the Vikings let the game get away from them a little bit in the middle, and an Ivan Pace scoop and score on a fumble recovery was really what got the Vikings back in it. But if you look at the box score, the Vikings certainly, they punted twice to end the first half, and then they didn't punt again until that Justin Jefferson drop, right? So there really wasn't a lot of offensive failure. It's just they didn't really have all that many drives. They only had 9 true drives. They had one drive, trying to get in field goal position at the end of the game. Couldn't quite do it. And then they had a drive earlier in the game where Darnold threw an interception. And they had a drive at the end of the first half where they weren't able to get in the field goal position. They were only able to run 2 plays, right? So, there weren't a lot of drives, only 9 for the Vikings in this game. They scored on, 4 of them, or yeah, something like 4 of them. And then, or no, they scored on 5 of them, I believe. And then they kicked 3 field goals, or no, sorry, getting all mixed up here. They scored, it would be 1 touchdown on offense, kicked 3 field goals, and then got, I'm sorry. I should cut this. We're an hour and 12 minutes in. I'm not going to cut it. I apologize. They scored 2 touchdowns on offense, kicked 3 field goals, right? That's 5 scoring drives and 4 failed drives, 3 punts and 1 interception from Darnold. And really, if you look at it, the Vikings were able to generate a bunch of explosive plays in the game. They had a big 51-yard pass to Addison. They had obviously the Aaron Jones touchdown on like the second offensive play of the game after stopping the Lions on downs. They had a number of big plays down the field where they were able to be explosive. This was back when Christian Darrisaw was healthy, where I would say the Vikings were a very boomer bust offense in terms of they were hunting big plays constantly and they were accepting the sacks that came with them. If you look at the drives that failed for the Vikings offense, they came with tons of negative plays. There were sacks that led to field goals on a number of drives, but there were also a ton of penalties called against the Vikings in that game. The Vikings had 8 penalties called against them. 7 of them were on offense. There were a bunch of like holding calls, that set drives back that ended up forcing punts. If you look at the 2 drives where they punted in the second quarter, I think both of them included holding calls that set the Vikings back to like 1st and 20. There was one where they were like basically 1st and 30 or like 3rd and 24 or something ridiculous like that after a false start as well. So a lot of mistakes on the offensive side of the ball, I would say, that caused a very boom-bust offensive performance. Since then, like, everybody has gotten injured on the Lions. Now, I don't know if that narrative is exactly true. Obviously, they have a ton of players who have hit IR, but they weren't playing with necessarily a full cast of characters when they played the Vikings earlier in the season either. If you go back and look at the players in that game and the number of players, but the big key is the defensive tackle, Lee McNeil, has been hurt since, so they can basically not generate a pass rush at all. That should really benefit the Vikings moving forward. Because the Vikings have the talent to easily beat man coverage, and the Lions are also missing their best man coverage player in Carlton Davis, right? Terrion Arnold as a rookie, I think, is a little bit susceptible to that sort of thing, but the Vikings need to be able to consistently move the ball, avoid the mistakes that they had in the first game in terms of the penalties on the offensive side of the ball, and then also avoid the field goals that they were kicking, because that's what ended up coming back to bite them, right? The Vikings scored 5 times. The Lions scored 5 times in the game. And actually the Vikings scored 6 times, right? Because they had the touchdown, on the fumble recovery from Ivan Pace, right? So the Vikings offense scores 5 times. They score 6 times overall. They still end up losing the game, and they still ended up being down despite having the same number of scores by like 10 points, despite having the same number of scores as the Lions, because they kicked 3 field goals and the Lions scored 4 touchdowns. So that is absolutely the critical piece of this game to me, is that the Vikings need to be able to, just score touchdowns instead of kicking field goals when they get down into the red zone. And we see the Lions defense is pretty weak at this point. It should help them win the game. It doesn't mean the Lions offense is any less strong. So at the end of the day, on the defensive side of the ball, the Lions were really able to shred the Vikings in a number of scenarios. The Vikings did an okay job against the Lions offense. They got stops, but Goff only threw like 3 incompletions or something like that. They were able to sack him a little bit, and he was consistently able to get the ball over the middle of the field and get big gains to like wide open players was probably the most frustrating part. And if you look at going back into the game, I did coverage charting, and it's a little bit less of a sample for the Lions, because they only had to drop back like 28 times, which is the least any team has dropped back against the Vikings this year. But where they were really able to find success was attacking over the middle against cover 0 and quarters for the Vikings. Obviously, the big Amon-Ra St. Brown touchdown came against a cover 0 rep from the Vikings. The Vikings have moved away from running true cover 0 pretty much all year, and they didn't run it much in that Lions game either, but they've even moved away from running kind of the mug looks where they mug up cover 0. So I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out in this game, where I don't think you're going to see as much of that from the Vikings defense as you saw back in week 7. But the Lions also did a really good job attacking quarters coverage from the Vikings, from what I charted, kind of over the middle of the field with dig routes and that sort of thing. The Vikings actually didn't run a ton of Tampa 2 in that game, which is a little bit surprising, but you beat Tampa 2 in a pretty similar way to the way you beat quarters. One thing is that the Vikings only ran man coverage on 6 plays in that game. Out of 28, it was still like a 20% rate, which isn't actually all that far off from what they ran against the Packers, but they run it a lot more often on 3rd down these days than what they did. The Lions were able to answer the man coverage with Khalif Raymond, of all people, who kind of went off. He had that touchdown where Gilmore fell down on the route, and that was a man coverage. Khalif Raymond has been out. He's been on IR. I guess he's designated to return, and he was a full practice participant last week, so it'll be interesting to see if he's back. But I do think that him being like a smaller, shiftier player has a bit of an impact on the Vikings, and might be the reason he was able to be so successful, because the Vikings kind of have bigger corners and slower corners, right? I talked about how Gilmore isn't in his prime anymore. Shaq Griffin isn't really in his prime anymore. So they probably struggle a little bit more with the shiftiness and are able to deal with the physicality and like height of like a Tim Patrick a little bit better, or like an Allen Robinson, who's also still kicking around and on the Lions, a little bit better than what they're able to do against a Khalif Raymond. So it'll be interesting to see if Raymond is back. And I really truly don't know what the status is. It sounded like he practiced all last week, but didn't play against the 49ers. Obviously, it makes sense to not play somebody who's still coming back from injury against the 49ers in a game that doesn't matter, even if they did still play all their starters. But if he plays, it might make a difference. But I think the key to the game for me, for the Vikings, because Raymond had an impressive performance, but Amon-Ra St. Brown is the one who really went off, right? He had like 8 catches for over 100 yards and a big touchdown. So to me, the key is make someone other than him beat you. In your zone coverages, make sure you're leaning towards him. Play more man coverage where he's not as effective as of a route runner against man coverage and really didn't have any catches against the Vikings man coverage in the last game. Play more man coverage, make somebody else beat you. Also, don't get beat by the explosive play. So again, the Lions are an extremely explosive offense. We saw a ton of explosive plays in their game against us. The St. Brown touchdown, the long Jahmyr Gibbs touchdown. One of their most explosive players is Jameson Williams, obviously of the 2022 draft fame, where the Vikings traded down, took Scene and Booth, didn't get Jameson Williams. Williams doesn't do anything for 2 years, goes off for over 1,000 yards this year, right? He is a fast player, a really explosive player. Don't let him beat you in this game either by getting an explosive play. Last time the Vikings played the Lions, they held Williams to 1 touch for -4 yards, right? So I'm hopeful that they're able to contain that. They really haven't been beaten bad by like speed threats over the top or anything. They play a relatively safe defense, I would say, overall, so far this year. But so maybe if playing more man coverage and Khalif Raymond's playing, Khalif Raymond's the difference in this game. But at the end of the day, I'm fine with that as long as you shut down St. Brown and Jameson Williams, right? If a unexpected third option is able to step up and win the game, that's credit to the Lions for having the depth that they're able to have on offense. The other thing, is the Lions are without David Montgomery in the backfield in the running game. Last time the Vikings and Lions played, David Montgomery really was not all that valuable of a player for the Lions. He had a couple checkdowns that he ended up taking for pretty significant gains. He had like 40 something yards receiving, but he really wasn't able to get going on the ground. And Jahmyr Gibbs was the guy who gashed the Vikings, running kind of through them and catching a critical swing pass that went for a bunch of yardage. The Vikings, interestingly, don't do a great job, in my opinion, of covering backs out of the backfield. Part of that's by design because they don't expect the quarterback to get to that, but they can struggle a little bit in terms of just having a guy in that area. So it'll be interesting to see if the Lions try to attack that again. I would hope that the Vikings are able to avoid the Lions attacking them in the flat. And I think Blake Cashman will be a big part of kind of shoring up the underneath coverage for this defense and trying to chase down checkdowns and make plays kind of in that area. He'll also be critical in run defense, right? As he needs to kind of get over to the ball, and the Vikings need to stop a really, really potent run game by the Lions. The Lions are going to use their other players. Is it Igwebike? Is he still on the team? I can't even, or no, it's Craig Reynolds. No, is he the fullback? I can't even remember. I think it's Craig Reynolds, as their secondary, kind of short yardage kind of guy, but Gibbs will run in short yardage as well. It really, the key to me is to stop Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jameson Williams from getting a big play that shifts the game on you. The other thing I thought the Vikings did really good in the first matchup that hopefully they're able to get after again. We saw the 49ers have some success getting pressure on Goff and getting a couple sacks in that game, is to get after Jared Goff. They sacked him 4 times last game. It shut down a number of drives, and it can absolutely shut the Lions down again if they're able to get pressure after him. I talked about, the variety of pressure that the Vikings are able to bring. I talked about the success that Jonathan Greenard had against the Packers. I think he'll be able to have similar success against Taylor Decker, the left tackle for the Detroit Lions. So it'll be interesting to see if they're able to do that. The keys to the game, I think everything I just talked about are the keys to the game. The Vikings need to consistently move the ball and score. The Lions are a great offense. They're going to score points. I don't think you're going to completely shut down this Lions offense. You just need to win the shootout against them. And the Lions are banged up enough on defense, and the Vikings are skilled enough on offense to be able to make that happen. Now, I'm not saying that we should prepare for the defense to, let up a touchdown every single drive or let up points every single drive. I think the defense does need to step up and get a couple critical stops. But if you hold the Lions into the 20s in this game as the Vikings defense, I think you've done an excellent job, and you gave your offense all they should have needed to win the game, right? With how banged up and how poor this Lions defense is playing. So hopefully the Vikings are able to do that, go into Detroit, get the win, steal the number 1 seed from the Lions, and get home field advantage throughout the playoffs. That would be fantastic. It would be something that was absolutely not in my expectations for the Vikings starting this season. I think regardless of how this game plays out, this season can be looked at as a success for the Minnesota Vikings, but I'm really excited to kind of see what happens on Sunday night. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. You can find me, Matt Freese, at Fries Football on BlueSky. You can find my co-host, Nick Olson, at Nick Olson NFL on Twitter. We're at Kindred Skulls on both Twitter and BlueSky. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Also available on YouTube. And with that, Skull Vikings.